Alrighty, so today I'm gonna read from the News Reporter newspaper published in March 13th, year of 1880. And the article I'm gonna be reading is called The Famine in Brazil. Correspondence NY Tribune. While Americans are opening hearts and purses for the Irish poor, a far greater cry of suffering comes to us from another quarter. The Brazilian famine has been almost hidden, I think the N is gone, almost hidden from the world. Our journals have been silent about it or have given only the stereotyped notices that have reached them by way of Rio de Janeiro. Yet there, within 3,000 miles of New York, is being enacted one of the greatest tragedies in history, a tragedy before which the Irish famine sinks into the insignificance. The famine district is comprehended between the rivers Parnaíba and San Francisco, in that part of Brazil which is known as the Sertão. This region, unlike the rest of Brazil, has a sharp division of the seasons, half of the year corresponding to our summer being very dry and the other half rainy. Much of the land is often fitted for pasturage, while the valleys and hillsides give fine crops of cotton and sugar cane. Before the drought, the country was well populated, about as thickly as Ohio and Indiana, and the provinces comprehended here were regarded as among the most flourishing in the empire. The whole population was directly dependent on agriculture. There were absolutely no manufacturers and hardly any mines. Hi, Rap Master. Cattle raising was a principal industry, and sugar, cotton, and coffee were exported in considerable quantities. This region is subject to periodical droughts when 1 or 2 years the winter rains are lighter than usual or wanting altogether. Several of these droughts are recorded. None of them will compare to duration and terrible effects with the present one. It began in 1877 when the winter rains were almost entirely wanting, so that all the crops failed and the cattle died for want of food and water. By July of that year, a third of the population were begging for food. By November, 9/10 of the cattle had died, and rich and poor alike were suffering from hunger. The whole country was dried up, so that not even a green leaf or blade of grass could be seen, except along a few fertile hillsides. The poor people were gathered in camps almost the larger villages, where they lived on charity or on governmental aid. But this latter was scanty and irregular, and it was almost useless to beg. where the whole country was impoverished. Even at this time, the famine deaths ran up to 10 or 15 a day in small villages. Following this first year of drought came a second one over the greater part of the country. It did not rain at all, and at the best, there were only a few showers. As the people were starving already, this new calamity drove them to despair. In March of 1878, a great panic seized them. The whole population deserted the interior country and came rushing down to the coast cities. There were no railroads, and for the most part, no horses were. Let's go to the top. No horses were left. They came on foot as best they could. In a single province of Sierra, the exodus comprehended 500,000 people, and at least 150,000 died on the road, strictly speaking of starvation. This greatest mortality was during about 5 weeks between the 25th of February and the 1st of April. By that time, the interior country was almost deserted, and immense camps of refugees were formed near the coast. At one time, no fewer than 110,000 persons were gathered at Fortaleza, a city the normal population of which is no more than 225,000. These refugees were dying by hundreds. Many were absolutely without clothing. They lived in huts made of dry branches and daily came to beg in the streets, a horrible throng. After seeing these, I could believe the accounts of a shopkeeper. A refuge came to my house and asked permission to kill the rats that he might eat them. I have been constantly in receipt of advice from Sierra, and late letters from that province show that the drought still continues, while governmental aid is likely to be withdrawn. I may be allowed to mention the philanthropical work of a noble Brazilian to whom Sierra owes a saving of 10,000 lives. This gentleman is now secretary of the province, and his whole time is devoted to the relief of the refugees. He has, therefore, the best means of knowing the truth. I wish to call a special attention to one statement made in his last letter, namely that government aid for the refugees is likely to be withdrawn simply because the Brazilian treasury cannot longer withstand the strain. The effect of such an event would be simply appalling. The 250,000 people who are now fed by the government are more than poor. They absolutely have nothing in the world but the rags that cover them. They cannot find employment where they are because there is no one to employ them. Agriculture is destroyed utterly, and there are no manufacturers. They cannot get away from the province. The only way is by the sea or across hundreds of miles of drought stricken country, where they could get no food by the way. They cannot beg, for rich and poor alike are ruined. I know that Ireland appeals more directly to us because so many of her children are with us, and no one more heartily approves of the aid we have given than I do. But the need of Ireland is not and cannot be 1/10 as great as that of Sierra. In Ireland, a few cases of death from starvation call forth the tears of pitying world, but in Sierra, a whole population is facing the dread reality of famine. Out of 900,000 people who inhabited that province in 1879, 200,000 have died of starvation and 300,000 of pestilence. Of those who are left, 2/3 are fed at the public expense. If this aid is withdrawn, all must die. Could the case be harder? Well, and this is the end of this article on the topic of starvation in Brazil. And this was from a Google newspaper archive published in the March 13th, 1880 issue. And thank you for listening, you guys. And I think I'm gonna wrap it up. This article called The Famine in Brazil. Thank you guys for listening.